it's like this project is really about igniting a conversation, right? A new conversation, new conversations, that stimulate inquiry, right?
Yeah.
And help people. And then with that, like helping people to cultivate tools.
Welcome to Landmark Difference Makers, where we interview people making a remarkable difference around the world. Get ready to be inspired. Let's jump in.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Landmark Difference Makers. Today, we're going to be interviewing AJ Lovewins. This is the first part of a two-part interview series. AJ is a filmmaker and an activist and founder of Our People Rise, a nonprofit dedicated to empowering underrepresented communities through storytelling and transformational education. After overcoming homelessness and addiction, AJ has devoted his life to sharing stories of resilience and recovery, inspiring hope and demonstrating the power of human transformation. Through his docuseries, Our People Rise, American Tales of Triumph, premiering in 2025, AJ is inspiring stories of Americans overcoming homelessness, addiction, and mental health challenges and aiming to shed a positive light on these often bleak issues. Really, thank you for being here with us, AJ. It's really a pleasure and really just an honor to have you here.
Thank you so much, Seamus. Hi, everybody. Good to be here.
Um,
Thanks for showing up.
AJ, I'd like to start with, just your personal story. You have a personal connection to the issue of homelessness that, you've been through that experience. So,
Yeah.
can you just tell us a little bit about your journey into homelessness and your journey out of homelessness?
Yeah. So you know, it wasn't becoming homeless wasn't something that I saw coming. Um, I grew up middle class. I was adopted kid. Um, I I learned early on that my father was an alcoholic and my mother had mental health challenges. Um, my biological parents. Um, but I wasn't one of those kids who was, had domestic abuse as part of my story early on, or the family that adopted me, they weren't, alcoholics. They weren't. Um, they were good people, and I lived in a small town, and drinking was a favorite pastime, as it is for many of us in the towns we grew up in. But I seemed to take to it, and it was something I was good at. um, when I was 8, my parents, I brought us into the living room, and they told us that they were getting divorced. And it wasn't long after that I found my father's liquor cabinet, and I started to experiment to deal with the pain and deal with the absence of a toolkit at that age to process what was happening to me. It was, in retrospect, the second sort of dissolving of a floor of a foundation in my life, and so I ended up hanging out with other, back then we called us latchkey kids. You come home, there's a note, $5, and a key that you wear around your neck, and so we got into trouble and we explored, and we did what kids do, and I didn't know it then, but that was sort of the early uh, days of what would become the raging um, addiction problem in my life, that took me to the streets in San Francisco. Um, but yeah, I went to high school. I played sports. You know, had a bit of a double life. Sort of drifting into the under the bridges, and the places we weren't supposed to be drinking and partying in those young days. But yeah,
Well,
I
you said a moment ago, you didn't see homelessness coming.
yeah
And, when we were speaking earlier, you had shared about, you had made it to Los Angeles and you had a career as a screenwriter.
Yeah.
And homelessness doesn't necessarily happen in an abrupt fashion. How did it come about for you?
Yeah. So, flash forward, I ended up in Hollywood out of high school. I decided I wanted to pursue a career as, an actor, and was enamored by the whole machine there and lifestyle. And, it was the early 90s, and, crack cocaine hit the scene. And, I was bartending at that point, nights, and auditioning daytimes, and the other bartenders were all doing coke. And, one thing led to another. Somebody introduced me to crack cocaine. And I said, yeah. And I had no idea how my biochemistry, my physiology, my, young addicted mind would attach to it. And it's a really sad story because, you know, millions of people in the United States went down because of the crack cocaine crisis. I mean,
Yeah.
mothers with babies, selling their babies, doctors, lawyers, mayors, I mean, this was an epidemic like nothing I think perhaps we have seen today, in terms of how fast it came on. And so it hit me, and I tried to hang on the best I could. I had friends that were in, the film industry I worked for. I had some success in my career as an actor, as a screenwriter. I ended up selling a screenplay at one point, but I would drift off, and find myself at the after party and the after parties. And then ultimately, like waking up in strange places, off of Sunset Boulevard, unable to fill that void, having to buy more and more and more drugs, as most addicts do and can relate with.
Was
And,
there a
and
point where you realized you were now had crossed the line and were unable to get back?
I did, it was, the days where I started to, like I said, wake up in strange places, you know, um, and you kind of scratch your head when that starts to happen, and I think for all addicts, all alcoholics, it's what we call the bottom, and for me, I was the variety of addict that kind of, bounced along the bottom for quite a long time. But yeah, you kind of realize, like this isn't normal, this is, everybody's driving to work at 8 a.m. and you're like, been up all night,
Yeah,
trying
yeah.
to figure out how you can, get more money to buy more drugs, and it's scary, but it's a fear that I suppressed, and I did everything I could, at that time, to avoid, and I would just bounce back into my normie, persona, and, pursue my career and keep working and staying positive. And, I just couldn't deal with it at that point, the fact that I was an addict.
Now, there was a point where you were homeless for three years in
Yeah.
San Francisco.
Yeah.
Um, what is, for people that, I think for most people that haven't experienced homeless or haven't intersected with homelessness,
Yeah.
you have brief interactions with people,
Hmm.
on the street, intersections, giving people some money, maybe a brief conversation, try to
Yeah.
encourage people.
Yeah.
Most people's, most, to use your word, normie
Right.
people intersect with homeless people very briefly.
Hmm.
And, you know, I, my own conversations, extended conversations I've had with people experiencing homelessness, I've not encountered very many people that, want that circumstance to persist.
Okay.
Um, but it seems like once you're once you are no longer housed, the networks of relationships that you had
Mm-hmm.
weaken and diminish. And with the atrophy of that network of relationships, you have, you have, your network is smaller. Now, I don't know if that's, true, but it's in your case, but
Yeah.
to be homeless for 3 years is a long time.
Yeah. Well, I mean, for me, what happened was, so I was in Hollywood. I was, trying desperately to hang on to this career, as a screenwriter and, you know, doing the Hollywood shuffle and uh, saving face and all that good stuff. I was, it was, it was escaping through my fingers, despite my best efforts to hang on to my life. And I really, what happened was, I, th there was, a situation that happened where I ended up losing my housing. And after I lost that housing, I went into a depression,
Mm,
and I really fell into a victim mentality. Um, and some of the people that I thought were my friends at that point, were really just people that I was partying with and running and gunning with, and they weren't there for me. And
mm,
that was a tough blow. And there was a point where I just couldn't hold on to trying to show up for that life, or, I mean, as simple as like just continuing to pay my phone bill. It just became too much. And I just remember one day I just took my phone. It was really one of the last things I had. And at that point, the landlord had come and evicted me like in a day. I didn't know that couldn't be done at that point, but I had just taken all my bags and walked out, and was literally, the door was locked behind me. And it was, like, it was a bad scene. And I was, I was left with, like, visiting drug dealers, to like have a couch to sleep on, I mean,
mm.
that was my network at that point, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
And that started to unravel. Yeah, I mean, long story short, I just kind of let go. I let go, and I just plunged, into the world of being unhoused, because I didn't know what else to do,
Yeah.
and I ended up, you know in San Francisco. Um, uh, I had gotten a ride there with some people I had known. They were a little shady. Well, they were a lot shady, and they were too much for me. And so I said, "You guys, I got to get out. Just let me out right here. See you later." And it was atop a hill in San Francisco, where there's a church called Grace Cathedral. Um, and I was there, just like all of a sudden, my whole life had changed. I had like a bag of clothes on my back and like $50, and I, was trying to find a room to rent for the night, and I couldn't find anything. And I ended up walking down that hill, and at the bottom of that hill in San Francisco is the Tenderloin, which I had no clue was like one of the worst places in the world. I mean, the
Mm,
homelessness, the drugs, the crime. It's really, really notorious district. And that's where I was for the next 3 years. When I got to the bottom of the hill, I met the friend that would introduce me to shooting crystal meth. And
mm,
it was ironic because it was at that same time that I was telling myself that I was really done with that chapter in LA, and that life I was trying to live, and that person I was trying to be. And in my mind, I was thinking I wanted to try and discover this thing called spirituality. And I was raised Christian. After the divorce, my parents stopped going to church, and I really had no relationship with any kind of spirituality or anything. And I thought, hey, this is a good time in my life to find that. But the addiction was so strong that, when that friend I met was like, hey, try this, you know I let him
mm.
stick a needle in my arm. you know.
Mm.
And it was on the same day that I was having a guy give me a tattoo of a cross on my left arm, which I still have. So there I was, you know, a tattoo of a cross on my arm, and then somebody fixing me and shooting dope in my other arm at the same time. And that really set the precedent for the next 3 years, and the spiritual warfare and the psychosis and
Yeah.
the inner battle for, you know, right and wrong and up and down and you know, so much more, you know,
Yeah.
occurred for me, and I came out the other side completely devastated. You know, it took me 10 years just to be able to sit across the table from somebody and have a conversation and look them in the eyes without twitching, you know.
Yeah.
Sort of, I had picked up this really bad sort of avoidant
Yeah.
twitchy behavior. I couldn't breathe and panic
Well,
attacks, so on and so forth. But
well, I appreciate you being willing to talk about it. You know, it's clearly
yeah,
not a happy time in your life and not necessarily a comfortable thing to talk about.
yeah, well, it happens and it's real. And you know, I think we need to have more conversations publicly about, you know, addiction, about trauma, you know, about the broken systems and mostly about the beautiful people that are out there on the streets who are suffering. And you know, one of the things that was the most profound for me during that time was that I had a completely different perspective on life. I had come from Hollywood and, you know, sort of the classic living, you know, swimming pools and movie stars life to, you know, literally, you know, being in the ghetto with nothing. You know, and you know, I had a good heart always, and I did stop and help people who were, you know, unhoused, you know, during those earlier years of my 20s, but I had no clue. I had
Mhm.
no clue. In San Francisco, I met moms and veterans, children, teenagers. I mean, the abuse, the neglect, you know, uh, the corruption, you know, but the quality of people out there, remarkable. I mean, for me, you know, when I see people on the streets, I see gold, you know, I see our divinity today, you know, the preciousness of
Yeah.
life. Um, and I truly believe that, you know, that when we begin to, you know, recognize that at scale in this country, we'll see a shift in terms of what's possible, you know, which brings us to landmark, right? Possibility.
Well, bring it. I definitely want to talk about Landmark, and I definitely want to talk about the beautiful people.
Yeah.
Um, but you're here now.
Mm.
What
Am I?
what what allowed for
Forward.
you to get from the circumstances of the streets of San Francisco to sobriety and now making the kind of contribution you're making? What
Yeah.
was
So what's that?
just what was it that intervened or
So yeah, I mean, flash forward, it's 3 years later. I'm walking the streets of San Francisco. It's a windy day. I'm probably, you know, a buck 25, skinny, emaciated, you know, haven't talked to my family in 3 years, you know. I wanted to note that, you know, like that network that you talked about that shrinks for people who are unhoused, there's such a big shame component, you know what I mean? There was for me, that you just can't pick up that phone. It's like 800 pounds, you know, and you just, you know, 3 years goes by and you haven't spoken to your family. In fact, I met someone just recently who on the streets, I stopped and talked to this guy and I'm like, have you talked to your family? And he's like, no, he just can't, you know what I mean? Because you're so ashamed, you know, and that's another reason why these conversations are so important, you know, is to start dissolving that shame barrier, you know, that just keeps us separate. It keeps us in that place where our disease, you know, our addiction really likes to work on us too as addicts. But so you know, 3 years later, I'm walking around. It's a windy day, and like literally, I was kind of stumbling down the street, and this huge gust of wind came up, and it just blew me into a phone booth. Back then, we had phone booths, you know. And I reached in my pocket I don't know why. I just did. And I had a quarter in my pocket. And it was if something was just happening. I went in the phone and I called my foster mother. So after that, after I was adopted, the parents got divorced and they couldn't handle me anymore and they passed me back and forth. I came home and my stuff was packed on the porch and I ended up having a foster family. So that foster family, became really my rock,
Mm.
and so Ruby, my foster mother, picked up the phone and she's like, I'm not doing good. And she said, I know. I don't know how she knew. I guess moms just know. Maybe because I hadn't called home in 3 years, but anyway, she said, come home. And so I was one of the I was very fortunate that I had that. Some people don't have that.
Yeah.
And for whatever reason, higher power or whatever, I got on a bus and I went home. Now, mind you, I was a moving train of problems. You know what I mean? And it wasn't but 2 weeks that they could not take me at home anymore. And I was back on
Mm.
the streets. But
Mm.
in that very short period of time, I managed to go to the social services office in that small town I lived in and apply for treatment. Um, and so 2 weeks later, you know, some stuff went down. I was involved with some bad situation and it fell back at the house and they were like, whoa, this is way too much. Dad took me an hour and a half away to Seattle and said, hey, we love you, but you got to get your shit together. And so I was on my own again, but I relapsed one more time. I literally like went into psychosis. Somehow I knew to get myself to an AA meeting. I was tripping balls, and I don't know if I could say that, but I looked down in the
Yes,
carpet.
you
I saw
can.
I saw Jesus in the carpet. Like there's just a face of Jesus. It was so weird. Uh, and then the next day, I got a phone call from that treatment center, Olala, Spirit Mountain in Washington State, and they said we have a bed for you, and I took it.
Mm.
So I think it was all sort of like divinely orchestrated when I look back at it, but that was the beginning. Was going into treatment, and it was a 30-day program. I didn't hear a word they said, but the food was good. I slept good, and I just remember some counselor guy there with like feathers and sage, trying to talk to us, out in the woods.
But also chemical free during that time.
I was chemical free for 30 days. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's, so important, it's everything really, to get that break in the action. So I went there, I went to a second phase program. That was like a 95-day program. 45 days in, I decided it was a great idea to like grab my bike and, get on a bus and go back to the Tenderloin to see my friends. And I ended up in detox center and that same night after I got off the train in San Francisco, uh, uh, you know, pure psychosis, could hear everyone talking to their voices in my head and all of that stuff right back. And then the next day I got food stamps, sold them to a Chinese woman in the mission in San Francisco and got back on a bus and went back to Vancouver to that center. They didn't let me in, but I was able to get into a men's sober living house.
Mm.
And from there it was just, it was up and down, I mean, really for the next 10 years, I would put together 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, 6 months, 90 days, 30 days, it was just really and re-traumatizing each time. But I got a therapist, somebody had taken me to a landmark education forum when I was like 20 in LA, when I had first gotten to LA and it popped into my head. Uh, I had gone to Agape Church in my early 20s with Michael Beckwith back then. Um, and for whatever reason, it was after that San Francisco debacle, and I was back in Washington in that sober living house that I came up with this question. And it was like, what if? It was like, what if I did this? What if AJ did this, 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 and this? What would become of AJ's life? I got curious, right? And so I dipped my toe into Landmark. I dipped my toe into 12-step recovery. I dipped my toe into yoga. I dipped my toe into, men's groups and different things. And I started this journey of personal growth and transformation work because I wanted to change. I wanted to see what was possible. And um, it was about that time that I had a friend that I was roommates with, named Joseph, who reached out to me, and he was living in Northern California and steeped in the human potential movement. Um, and he started to sort of teach me these little, distinctions in personal growth and transformation as well. So, sort of my friend and mentor in a way during that time. But
Well, when you did Landmark, you eventually created in the self-expression leadership program, which we talk about often on the podcast here, you created a project that became known as Harmonic Humanity.
yeah, I did. And I just wanted to say also, before I answer that there are brilliant people on the streets, who are just experiencing being unhoused, um, as a temporary situation. I mean, there's a spectrum of intelligence levels or spiritual, you know, uh, maturity out there on the streets. I mean, it's really wide. That's my experience. But for myself, I didn't have any tools in my toolbox. You know what I mean? Like, and that's why I struggled as a child, to process some of the emotions and things that I was going through. And I got into alcohol. I mean, looking back, right? And even getting back on my feet and getting sober, as a first step was really just the beginning. I even at that point, I didn't have a toolkit to stay sober, and to do the things that I needed to do to stay in those programs. Um, I didn't know what trauma was. No one had ever taught me or explained it to me. I didn't understand that, that I was running on conditioning. I was running on inherited belief system. I didn't know how to compartmentalize things. I didn't know how to reframe. I didn't know what reparenting was. So that 10-year period from, like when I got off the streets to, when I said, I kind of got back to baseline, Landmark and, Agape and, I became a certified counselor during that time. Somehow I started my first nonprofit during that first 10 years of bouncing back off the streets. I just I wanted to volunteer. I just had this notion that would be good for me, and so I went to a soup kitchen in Seattle and I started just stacking chairs and washing dishes. That that just blossomed. I mean, I advocate for service work so highly for anybody who's for anybody really, no matter what, it's just so beautiful. It's so potent with gifts, for
But,
everyone.
but I think there is something when you're in a circumstance like homelessness where having your attention off of yourself and on others
Yeah.
is a different state than the
It's a
baseline.
different, it's a different frequency. It's a different energy. You reference from a different perspective. Your listening shifts. Um, I mean, it's like physiology. I think it's just like on a molecular level, it's completely different life experience. Yeah, service is love, and love wins, as I like to say.
Well, we should also just to kind of complete your story before we move on to harmonic humanity and
Yeah,
uplift rise.
yeah.
That's not your given name, Lovewins.
No, so yeah, Lovewins we talked about it earlier. So I mean, I would walk the streets all night, and I was in survival mode during those 3 years. And I used to say love, wins. I'd like left foot love, love wins. I used to go back up to that church where I got dropped off, and I'd pray at the gates up there. And I mean, I was very spiritual, and um, it was a strange mix, to be like seeking such, I don't know, I guess for me, they were lofty spiritual goals, but at the same time, you're destroying yourself, it's like, it's a real, interesting, dynamic to live through,
Yeah, yeah.
but that was my thing, like I would shoot dope and go bring blankets and coffee to homeless people when I was out there, it was just, um, but I couldn't stop, and things got darker and darker and darker and darker and darker, and you know nearly killed me on several occasions. I mean, I've been to so many hospitals and detox centers, and
Yeah. Well, and you're very clearly very fortunate.
very, very fortunate, lucky, all that stuff, blessed.
Well,
But yeah,
let's talk about harmonic humanity.
sure, yeah,
That's something that you created specifically to make a
yeah,
difference for homeless folks. Can you tell us how that was structured?
yeah. So harmonic humanity. So what happened first, I went to the soup kitchen. I started moving chairs and helping people. There was a stage in this beautiful cafeteria soup kitchen, and I started asking musicians to come and play music because it just seemed like a good idea. And I noticed how the room just shifted and lit up. And you see guys that were clearly on the streets for years, dancing, with their food. I just thought, wow, how magical. And it kind of opened up, it kind of disarmed people a little bit. And so you could talk to people and counsel and coach a little bit. And so I was just very like into that, and I did that for 5 years at that it's called Roots Youth Shelter in Seattle, in the University District. It's an amazing nonprofit. It's still there. Sinan Demirel was the director. I think he's on the board now, but um, and it was about that time I was in Seattle, after treatment and all of that, and that's when I went to check out Landmark Education, and and um, and I took the forum. I couldn't afford it. Someone scholarshiped me in, and I liked it so much I did the advanced course, um, and then the self-expression and leadership course, and that little soup kitchen program became my project, and then it became Harmonic Humanity, and the rest is history. We produced these albums and gave the albums to people on the streets, and they would sell them and keep 100% of the money to help them buy food and clothing. And some people put deposits on rooms, and it was pretty amazing. um, we did one
Yeah.
album. The first one was called Lovewins. The second one was called Relief. On the second one, that friend I told you about from Northern Cal had a connection to Jason Mraz, and Maroon 5. And so they ended up donating music to be on that second album. And we did another album, and we had Sarah McLachlan and John Butler Trio, Michael Franti, some other musicians. So it was pretty cool. It became like a thing. And so that was the first nonprofit, Harmonic Humanity. It's still around. We're trying to take that digital. So it's in a bit of a cycle of transformation itself right now. But
Because
it
at the
fed
time,
me.
people could sell physical CDs.
It was physical CDs, and so we really want to move into the digital age. But we've had challenges, and it's an animal of its own. But what a great program, and I strongly believe that being able to have a job and a way to support yourself, and have some dignity, when you're coming out of that world, is so critical. And it's really hard to get a job. You know what I mean? If you don't have an address, if you don't have the right clothing or whatever. And so the beauty of that, street vendor programs are beautiful, is that anybody can get a job. You just need a lanyard, a t-shirt, a hat, and, some product. And so we talk, with our People Rise, which we'll talk about, but, this is more like skill building, program that I'm developing now, like helping people cultivate toolkits for transformation. But it's hard to even like think about transformation when you can't eat, you know what I mean? you know?
Yeah.
And so I do think it's, you know, such a beautiful like sister organization in a perfect world, you know, as I look forward to the next, you know, 5 years, you know, to where we can offer people a way to like fend for themselves and support themselves, and also then introduce, you know, like tools for change.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Landmark Difference Makers. If you're inspired by what you heard and you want to learn more about Landmark's programs or explore upcoming episodes, visit landmarkforumnews.com to find resources, event details, and more stories of people making extraordinary impact around the globe. If you are already a part of the Landmark community, check out the Landmark subscription, designed to provide ongoing support in creating a life you love. Visit landmarkworldwide.com to learn more. Until next time, keep creating, keep contributing, and keep making a difference.